Okay, good morning, everyone. We'll get started here. My name is Peter Millibar. I'm the MLA for Kamloops North Thompson and Chair of the Select Standing Committee on Public Accounts. I'd like to acknowledge we're meeting today on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people known as the Songhees and Esquimalt Nations. Today's agenda, we are considering two reports from the Office of the Auditor General. The first report we'll be considering is titled Annual Follow-Up Report Performance Audit Recommendations 2019-2022. From that report for the committee, you'll notice we have deliberations at the end of the day, so any potential action from any of those we'll deal with at the very end of the meeting. And with that, I will turn it over to our soon-to-be departing Auditor General, Michael Pickup, to turn the meeting over to him for his office's presentation on the performance audit recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start by acknowledging with respect that at the Office of the Auditor General, we conduct our work on Coast Salish territories. Myself, as a status India member of the Maibukek First Nation, I'm delighted to be a visitor on these lands and I'm honored to be here. Our audit follow-up process is one of the new initiatives that we implemented in recent years. Today, we're discussing our second annual follow-up report that we released in May of this year. The recommendations contained in the report were accepted by the organizations that we audited. In all, there were 130 recommendations from 24 audit reports published between 2019 and 2022. They involve performance audits of ministries, crown corporations, health authorities, and school districts. For this report, government organizations provided updates on what they've done to implement audit recommendations. Our office reviewed these progress reports and confirmed whether they faithfully represented the progress. The additional work that we undertake in the process allows you to have greater confidence in the information that is being reported to you. It provides you with trusted information about the progress organizations are making in addressing issues identified through our performance audit reports. And it takes a complete team effort to put together a report like this. And many members of the Office of the Auditor General team had a hand in doing this work. And I want to thank each and every one of them. The effort was led by two people who are with me this morning. Laura Hatt, immediately next to me, Assistant Auditor General of our Performance Audit Practice, and Laura Pierce, a little farther away by the door, Executive Director of Performance Audit. I thank both of you for the work that you've done. I also want to acknowledge and thank the many staff from the organizations that we audited for their help as we gathered information for this report. We had nothing but complete professionalism and cooperation. With that, I will ask Laura Pierce to take you through our follow-up process and the results of the follow-up process. There's somebody at the door.
Do you mind if I drop this off to Susan? Sorry, there's usually staff.
Thank you.
So with that, Chair, I'll turn it over to Laura Pierce and ask her to walk through the follow-up process and the results this year. Laura?
Thank you, Michael. Good morning, Chair and committee members. Thank you once again for your ongoing interest in our reports, including our second annual follow-up report that we tabled on May 21st. This report builds off the work that we started in the fall of 2022 when we launched our new follow-up process and began asking entities to prepare progress reports that showed whether they had completed past recommendations. Last year's report looked at 112 recommendations from 18 audits published between 2019 and 2021. This year, we covered even more ground by adding audits from 2022, resulting in 130 recommendations from 24 audits published between 2019 and 2022. Before turning to the results, I'll provide a quick recap of the process that we used to complete our follow-up work. We kicked things off in the fall of last year when we asked entities to prepare a progress report that confirmed whether each recommendation was complete or incomplete as of November 30th, 2023. We also asked organizations to provide a short summary for each recommendation along with an anticipated completion year, which was a new addition this year. Once we received the progress reports, we then reviewed them to assess whether entities had faithfully represented their progress. This involved meeting with staff, reviewing key documents, and carrying out additional procedures where needed. The public report compiles the results of this work. In each report, we found that entities had faithfully represented their progress. The progress reports showed that as of November 30th, 2023, government had completed 57% of the 130 recommendations that were included in this report. They also showed that government intends to complete all of those recommendations that remain outstanding. Being that this was our second year, we looked at the progress that entities had made on the 64 recommendations that remained outstanding in our first follow-up report that came out in July of 2023. We found that organizations had completed a further 12 of those 64 recommendations over the past year, bringing the overall completion rate for 2019 to 2021 audits up to 53% from 42% last year. We also observed that completion rates varied quite a bit by the year that the recommendations were made. The overall completion rate for recommendations in 2020 and 2022 was over 70%, while the rate for recommendations from audits in 2019 and 2021 was under 50%. Lastly, I'd like to highlight that while 3 audits continue to have 0 recommendations complete, 7 are now completely implemented. Before I turn it back to Michael for his final comments, I'd like to highlight that from a process perspective, we were able to shave 2 months off of the process this year. There will always be some degree of lag between when organizations report their progress and when we publish the report. It takes time to review the progress report and carry out our assurance work. And it takes time for the entities to respond to our requests and provide us with the appropriate documentation. As I mentioned, we carried out 24 reviews this year, so it's a big accomplishment to do in a short amount of time. We will continue to do this work on an annual basis, but we'll be shifting our cycle next year to line up with a September 2025 release date. This will ensure that the committee receives our follow-up report while the House is in session, providing members with more time to deliberate on the report and call back organizations where appropriate. To conclude, I would like to reiterate what Michael noted in his opening comments and extend our thanks to all the entities that were involved in this work. We continue to see lots of collaboration and support for the follow-up across government. I'll now turn it back to Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. So just before we move on and I turn it back to you, Chair, I will draw your attention to 3 questions that we raise at the end of our report at a glance at the one-pager, and I just find they're interesting reflection points. One could be, why is the completion rate of recommendations for 2019 and 2021 considerably lower than the recommendations from 2020 and 2022? Question 2 could be, is government satisfied with the increase from 43% to 53% for the 2019-2021 recommendations that we reviewed last year? And, partially why I would raise that question is because people ask me that question, and I'm like, really, the question is not to me. Right? If elected members feel that's an important question, that question is to government who are running these programs. And finally, a logical question to me, which relates to the question before that, is does government have a goal for completion rates? Like, is it X and we're less than X or more than X? So I find those are sort of 3 interesting reflection points that I'm left with when I look at this work and wanted to share that with you. But Chair, that's it. Pass it back to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that. We'll open up the questions. Spencer, I do see you on TV, so if you have a question or whatever, just wave and we'll try to get you in line. Corinne.
Much for this work, and I'm really happy to see it. I think it's really important that we have transparency in terms of the expectations of the ministries and what they're actually doing with respect to these recommendations. I've got a couple things to start with. I'll pass it over and then probably come back to a few things. The first question that you asked us to consider was why the difference in the completion rates between 2019 and 2020. I'm thinking that perhaps that has to do with the understanding or realization by ministries that there is going to be public reporting on the outcome, and whether that is a motivator, that there's going to be more eyes on the process and what they're actually doing to work towards these goals. And just to tack that on, not all goals are created equally, or not all recommendations are created equally. There's different urgency in terms of what needs to be dealt with. They can be weighted differently because one recommendation might be very easy to implement and another recommendation might be a multi-year project to be able to implement. And we have also this anticipated completion times as opposed to thou shalt complete, or we commit to completing by a certain day. And I can imagine that we might in future reports, those anticipated completion dates, there may be some slippage on that because they are very, very vague. So probably hard to find a specific question in there, but those were just some of the things I was thinking is that increase in completion because of the transparency that's been added to it? Really, is that anticipated completion, is that enough when we're talking about holding government to account for getting work done? And then the question you asked us also, I'll be done in a moment here. The question you asked us also is what is government's expectation in terms of completion of this work? And I would think that we have to have 100% as the expectation, but a realistic expectation on an annual basis, where I say not all recommendations are created equally, is coming up with something like that where we can make a determination on what's realistic and what's not realistic. That was a lot, sorry.
A couple of comments, and I hope this is helpful, and if you don't feel like I've addressed something, it's not an intention, so certainly bring me back to it, no problem. So a couple of things. I think one is on the recommendations themselves. If we keep in mind when we do these performance audit reports, we don't have 50, 40, 30, 20 recommendations in an audit. They tend to be focused, tend to be 10 and under generally. Very few audits that we've done in the last 4 years with more than 10 recommendations. So that would mean that yes, sometimes these recommendations are complicated and involve a lot of things, but also they are focusing on, and if one assumes, which I believe, that we are focusing on high-risk areas, I don't look at sort of triaging recommendations to say these ones are important, these ones aren't. I think all of these recommendations are important, or I would look to the three of us and say, why are we doing these audits to begin with if they're not focused on important areas? So that's why you won't see us sort of say, well, that recommendation is not complete, but it's not important. They're all important. Now, having said that, I'm not running these programs. I'm not government. We're the auditor. It's up for government to make decisions. When something gets done, what are other priorities, what is happening, what is complicated. One thing that I do encourage is really, if something is going to take you 5 years, say that in your response if you think it's going to take you 5 years. Like let's not make it vague. So I think over my time here, the responses have gotten better, but I think there's probably still room for improvement to the extent one can of making those responses tangible. We like to use that term SMART if you're used to that SMART sort of goal thing, right? Make it more specific, measurable, like that kind of thing can be reflected in the recommendations as well. In terms of a goal, I only share this with you because I know I shared it in the past at previous committees, and I'm not saying this is right, wrong, or otherwise. I'm just sharing a story. When I was Auditor General in Nova Scotia, the Nova Scotia government sort of over the years had set a public goal that 80% of our recommendations should be complete within 2 years. Okay? The magic isn't in the 80, the magic isn't in the 2 years. That was their goal. So we were very much, sort of auditing too and making an opinion on, and people were judging them based on, well, that's your own goal. And sometimes that goal was met and sometimes it wasn't. And I think in here in terms of, and why this work is important and why you, in fact, as a committee asked us to do this work, my first year here and why we went on to this is so that it could inform you as a committee as to what are you concerned about. If something is zero, do you want to hear from the organization? So those questions that we pose and that you bring up, like many things in life, I think the questions are easy. The answers are a little bit more complicated. You're not going to get a 30-second answer to those questions, right? It's in the detail. It's, so if something here is zero, right, what is the story behind the zero? What are the details behind that? And then, frankly, we've given you this report so then, you can judge whether you think that is okay based on what somebody says as to why something may be at zero. The other thing to your comment, I was trying to make some notes here because you said, there was a fair number of points there. So I believe, with 35 years of public service, I believe, the public service that we audit, whether it was here or in Nova Scotia or federally, when they agree with recommendations, they believe in the value of the work that we are doing, they believe in the value add. And certainly I've enjoyed that experience here when I've seen witnesses here on performance audits, stressing the value of what we have done. So I believe then if you take that to completion rates, I believe when you see completion rates go up, I don't think it's to tick a box to keep the Auditor General happy. I think, nobody's concerned about that. I think it's, and I believe it is the value in the recommendation that we made to start with. And if you look at a performance audit, approximately, 1/3 of the time spent on these performance audits is in upfront at the planning, so that we know what we're getting into is going to hit areas that's going to make a difference for the organization and that makes some sense, right? And how long it takes to implement that is a different story. So I certainly want to, commend and be fair to the public service, that often these are complicated issues, and I've never believed they're doing it to keep me happy. I believe they're doing it because they think it's the right thing to do, or otherwise I would frankly say to them, don't agree. And I will say this to anybody don't agree with the recommendation if you don't agree with it. Right? Like, talk to us, and we spend a lot of time in reporting. I can think of some audits in particular where we really want to get to a recommendation where somebody's going to do something with, rather than just get through that day. So I made some notes. So did I cover close to or near everything that you brought up?
Oh, yeah, you did, and gave me a bit more insight into it. And I just will clarify that I wasn't suggesting that any of the recommendations weren't important, but if we're talking about fighting a forest fire or providing data transparency, there are issues that are different. I know when the representative for children and youth provides her recommendations on MCFD, there's also a part that talks about how far along they are in completion. So it's not whether something is completed or something isn't completed, but they've done 75% of the work or whatever it is. But no, you answered my questions, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thanks. Spencer?
Okay, there we go. Am I coming through clearly?
Yeah.
Hello, joining you from the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory. Sorry I couldn't be there in person today. Thank you, Mr. Auditor General, for your service. Well, I've got a chance to say it not in person, but virtually. Really appreciate it, and I wish you the best on your return to your beloved home. I guess I wanted to say I really found the follow-up reports helpful this year, especially with the addition of when ministries expect or when government entities expect to complete, instead of just seeing zero completed, being able to see, well, on these recommendations, we expect to complete by 2024, 2025, 2026, with some reasoning behind them. And I think it will serve future public accounts committees well, because that's another level of accountability, which in some previous years we were lacking. So we weren't able to say, well, you said you'd complete by this year. What's been the holdup? So just to put that on the record, I really appreciated that. No question, sorry. Just I found that really useful, and to answer your question around how your office is assisting our committee. Thank you.
Rona Ray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the report. I'm just going back to the time when we first started to receive these reports. Rather than having this stack of very many reports, we're now looking at an encapsulated, nice contained, more, I would say more relevant, more pertinent, because as you had pointed out and was very evident, is that programs change, systems change. direction changes, so some became obsolete, redundant, some of the recommendations, because those systems don't exist anymore. And I've seen in this report too, where, excuse me, there are systems that are changing. And in one of your points, the third point in your at a glance, and you mentioned this as well, that just because it says 0 doesn't mean that work isn't underway and that there is movement towards it. And I know last year this was sort of my point of contention about saying 0 or 100. And I see there's some refinement now with the 79%, 61%. You know, there's some numbers that are a little more refined, but it still doesn't capture, in essence, in that at a glance, that the work is. And I remember your response was that you can't. You know, you as an auditor can't say, well, it's 60% complete or whatever. And I'm just curious if it's possible for the ministries in their responses to say, are we at 75% completed, or are we still at 25? Are we getting there? Or how close? I mean, we see the anticipated completion date, and some of it is also going to be very difficult, as I can tell, because we're talking about iterative processes they're just a continuous improvement. And so, how do you get to a place where you say we've arrived?
Yeah, a couple thoughts on that. I think in terms of the responses themselves, that may be a more practical way to do it, and certainly want to give space and respect for whoever replaces me to have different views. But my view would be maybe in the responses, right, where you have anticipated completion date, we look to an offering to organizations if they want to put, you know, are they 50%, are they 75%, as you suggested, if they said that, because we don't actually, you know, do an audit work on their responses. So that may be something to think about, Laura, as we go forward in terms of the responses, if we want to let them do something. What I would discourage, only because I've lived it federally when I worked for the Auditor General, if we get into the 6 cat buckets. Okay, not started, partially complete, substantially complete, nearly substantial, then it just becomes an exercise. It takes so much time that the cost benefit is not worth it from what it becomes for the auditor to put into whether something is, you know, partially complete or, you know, closer to substantial. It just becomes not worth it. So the most practical way to do this, because remember, this is, we did what, 24 here? Right, that's a lot of reports that we followed up, and each of these are individual. So rather than bogging that down and having the timeline go the opposite way, because as Laura said, we've shaved 2 months off of this year, right? And that's the way to keep going, is to kind of shrink this time together. But it may be to put that information in the responses. And my two Lauras here have not fallen off the chair. So that may be something for us to think about and work on going forward. Did I hit everything you said?
Yeah, maybe one follow-up?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to say I really appreciate the cooperation that you have cultivated with the different ministries to really get into making your work valuable for them and for the public. And I really appreciate that that's a way for us to go forward. I think that the public expects to see that when words are made, when promises are made, that there is action, and it's really important that we have that independent eye to look at it to make sure that we've got the action behind the words. So thank you.
Thank you. And just one quick follow-up, I would say, you know, reflection on the two Lauras that are here and the many people who work behind the scenes doing the actual performance audits and doing the follow-up. You know, my reaction has been over the 4 years here, when I've sat at this table and the organizations that we're auditing are here, you know, they're more than just the polite nice, right, to say, oh, thank you for your work, right? Because, I mean, I've been around this for a long time now, and the responses are so tangible, and you know, the cooperation that the team has done with them, and the professionalism that really is on the people in the office, and I think it's reflected I would also suggest it's reflected over the last 4 years. With the report coming later this month, we'll have 40 reports. If we got bogged down in not having professional relations with these folks, and you think about all these audits we've done, most of them have had a lot of, significant recommendations and not always what I would say, super positive findings. We've been able to work through it with organizations, and that helps us get the number of reports out that we do. So while nobody is here next to me from government, I do appreciate the professionalism of the public service and the people we audit in dealing with our folks. And I think my own view would be that has been reflected on, if I look at Laura's group and her leadership, and that this is part of it in dealing with these organizations. I think we've had no turnover this calendar year, essentially, right? I mean, people are staying. And I tell you, you don't continue to do this job, and the folks who work on their teams, if the people you're auditing are difficult to deal with, okay, at some point you go, why am I going to continue doing this? So that has been helpful indirectly for us as well, in that, having good relationships helps us keep people. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity for me to share that.
Jackie?
Thank you, and thank you for the report. I want to assure you that I read all 80-some pages of it. Riveting reading. But concern from me is when we look at 2019, and we think how many years ago that was, and we have 2 reports in there that have 0 completion. And when I look at the importance of oversight of contracted services for children and youth in care, I am very concerned about timelines and executive expenses at School District 36. There's 2 recommendations and 0 have been completed. And we are talking how many years ago? So 5 years to complete. So I'm concerned about timelines, and I was interested in hearing you talk about government setting a goal of having most recommendations completed within a 24-month or 2-year period. And I wondered how the committee, a Public Accounts Committee, could send that message that perhaps we need to motivate by having some expected timelines for recommendations to be completed. And I am also very interested in knowing how we hear from government what their goal for completion rates would be. What is acceptable to government? Because I'm looking at some of these, and to me, I would like to motivate to completion as quickly as they can. And if it is, what are the barriers to having the work completed? Is it that the ministry or minister doesn't, I don't know what the process is. So is it finance? Is it leadership? Is it lack of commitment to the recommendations? But it seems to me that there are some that stand out, and I would be interested in hearing on timelines and on how do we understand what government's goal for completion is.
So the answers are going to be shorter than my normal, only because honestly, and part of this is staying in my lane here as the auditor, right? So we've given this report to the people in the legislature. We've given this report for the committee to use to hold government accountable, right? And accountability is what you're talking about. Questions on performance: is this good? Is this bad? Understanding what is around of it, and that's why I say those questions are easy, but the answers are more complicated. This report gives you a chance, perhaps, to zero in on areas where completion rates might be might be, in your view, lower than you think. And that was the point of this report, was to generate those discussions. Likewise, I mean, one could ask a different question for those that are 100% complete and very quick, or higher completion rates. What are they doing differently? What are they doing that enables them to do that? Is the nature of the recommendations different? Is the program different? But I think, Chair, the important part is here that the people to explain that are the ones running the programs and services, the ones that are accountable for these results. Like, I'm not accountable for these results. I'm not running the programs. I'm providing you the information to ask these folks. So that's why I don't put myself out there either to say I think the completion rate should be X. Because I would only say that if government said it should be X, and then we would be auditing against, well, you didn't make X, Y? Right, and I will also note, and again, this is just for info, and you've heard me say this before, when I was AG in Nova Scotia, when I arrived, the completion rate was around 50% within 2 years. When I left, it was around 75% within the 2 years, and there really was a focus on getting things done. So I don't know if that probably doesn't fully answer what you were looking for, but I do have to stay, right, I can't talk to the actual results and why something might be zero. Frankly, I would say you need to hear, if you want to have that discussion, it has to be with the folks who are responsible for those results. And I guess the other thing is, in terms of the bigger question as to an overall completion rate, that might be a higher level question in government, to be asked, rather than just within the individual ones as well.
And I guess, part of the problem that strikes me as we're having this conversation is that in a perfect world, the system is set up to do exactly that and have ministries back here to answer for and to explain why. But then the way the committee is set up and structured and the rules that bind them, it takes a majority of the committee to actually agree to have groups come back and actually be held accountable for what they are or aren't doing at the same time. And so that's not in your hands, I recognize that. But it does create this illusion of accountability and oversight that doesn't actually exist unless whatever the government of the day is willing to play ball and actually have those ministries come back and speak to the audits. And I say that because when I look at this, it kind of reminds me of, there was an old Seinfeld episode where he was at the airport trying to get his rental car. And they'd given away all the rental cars, and the clerk says, well, I have your reservation here, but I don't have a car for you. And he says, well, see, you know how to take a reservation, you just don't know how to keep a reservation. And so it seems like we have a lot of ministries right now that know how to accept a recommendation, but they don't want to actually enact anything to do with a recommendation. And that's not on the Auditor General's office, obviously, but it's on the minister responsible, and it's on the ministry responsible to either be serious about accepting a recommendation and doing their best efforts to implement, or as the auditor has said, just say we're not going to do that. But it almost seems if there's no consequence in terms of following up through this committee and a very public accounting for why recommendations are or not being actioned, ministries, some seem to have figured out it's easier just to agree and have the report disappear, because they'll never have to come back in front of this group to have to speak. If I look at the track record that we've had of trying to get some pretty serious topic issues brought back to actually have that accounting for. And so I think moving forward, and obviously we'll be up against an election, there'll be a new government, and that's part of the problem of change around this committee, or process and procedure always seems to get lost in new committee members coming on, or things of that nature, new governments, change of governments, shuffles. But it creates, it gets frustrating because we have the illusion of this public accounts committee that's supposed to be providing the ultimate in accountability and oversight. It's the only committee that the opposition chairs, yet it still has the majority of members by government members and things of that, which is all understood. But the illusion is one thing. If it doesn't operate in practice in that way, it gets very frustrating, I think, for the public, and it starts to feel like Some ministries, frankly, have decided it's easier to agree and move along than to agree and actually engage and actually deal with the recommendations. And I say that, and Michael referenced this earlier, most, when you look at them, are getting 4 or 5, maybe 6 recommendations. And they're still at 0. Good Lord, I mean, just to be at 50%, they just have to actually enact 2 out of 4 recommendations. And they're at 0. Like, we're not talking to get to 50% that they have to enact 50 or 60 fundamental changes inside of their organization to try to look like they're actually enacting recommendations provided by the Auditor General. They have other statutory officers, as we say, the Child and Youth and others in certain ministries that are providing their input as well, and yet somehow these recommendations don't get actioned. And so I guess the question I would have for the auditor's office is, how concerning is it when you have only 3, 4, or 5 recommendations and years pass that 0 action has been taken on some of those recommendations? Is that a red flag? Is that regardless of which ministry it is it taken as essentially we're not serious about doing the recommendations, we're just going to tell you that we've accepted it? Like, what is the view of the auditor's world when they see this repeatedly? Because I know how frustrated I'm getting as an elected on this committee. I can't imagine it's less within the auditor's office.
So some interesting points in there. One I would say is, fortunately, the position we're in, and part of why, one of the benefits of doing this work and having a nice, clean report that's easy to get through with the where do you stand, we can come back and do a full-on audit if we want to. I remember I used to say to folks in Nova Scotia, if you don't make some progress on that knees and hips and you think we're just going to go away, we'll just come back and do a full new audit on knees and hips. That one always stuck in my mind, knees and hips. So we can come back, and so we're using this to monitor to say, if a certain amount of time goes by and you don't sort of deliver on the things you're committing to, anticipated completion dates, we will watch the risk of that, and we can come back and do a full performance audit. So that is sort of what we're using this for, to watch. Again, I think we've got to be careful that we don't get drawn into setting, your completion rate should be X, or you should manage your ministry to say, get this completion thing done and don't do A, B, C, and D. Right, then we're into management, right? We can't be doing that. That is not our role. The other thing I would offer to you, with full respect, that it is not my position or job to offer advice to you as a committee as to things you could do. So putting that preamble there as a little bit of a guide, what I have seen, all I'm sharing is a story, what I have seen work well in some other provinces, and not just Nova Scotia, many others, is public accounts committees, for example, bringing in the Canadian Audit and Accountability Foundation. Some of you have been at the Canadian Council of Legislative Auditors, Canadian Council of Public Accounts Committees meetings, where CAF, they're called, have spoken. They do a lot of work across the country with committees and looking at how committees perhaps might want to look at good practices, how committees are functioning. Again, respecting is not my job to offer you thoughts or advice. I'm sharing a story of what I've seen work well. And I spend a lot of time with my AG colleagues from across the country. There's only 11 of us. And certainly they share with me what they see when CAF comes in. Partially, to be honest, is you don't want to put, and I say this for the value of the future Auditor General, whoever's going to take this job, you don't want to put the Auditor General in that position. But you don't want the Auditor General to give you feedback, even if you ask, on how a committee is functioning. Right? That's not a good setup. But if you were to look to this independent organization that is not connected with the audit office, that go and do this work, they can be valuable. I hope that is received in the manner it was intended to be helpful.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean,
Okay.
worst case is we just accept all the recommendations and do nothing. Corinne?
Thank you very much. I've got two questions, and the first, or they're both really process questions. So all of the recommendations that we've seen here have been accepted by the ministries. So, but I have to imagine that sometimes ministries don't want to accept what the recommendation is. Do you, in that case, go into some kind of, and negotiation isn't the right word, but a revising of a recommendation so that a ministry can feel more confident that it's actually able to do that work. So there might be a recommendation that you give, and I don't mean that this lessens the recommendation, but that sometimes just things realistically may not be able to get. So is there a bit of a negotiation there? So that's the first question. I'll do my second question as well. And I'm going to go back to MCFD only because that's the world that I have lived in. And I also have the examples here. When you are looking at this work that you're doing, do you, as part of the audit, go to other reports or recommendations that have been made by other bodies? For example, Ernst & Young did a full audit of the specialized homes and support services in 2018, 2019. I was interviewed as part of that. The recommendations are very similar to the recommendations that are contained within this report. And then also another statutory officer, representative for children and youth, also has on their website a number of MCFD recommendations, and it shows, and some of those are a bit related to what I'm also seeing in here. So does the Auditor General, does your office look outside at other recommendations that have been made as part of what informs the work that you're doing?
Sure. Thank you for the I really enjoy those questions. No, it's great. And I just wanted to pause as well. So I'm going to give you my thoughts, but certainly Laura, add to it, adjust, give perspectives that may be different, may be the same, maybe additional as well. So I think it's important, particularly Laura as the Assistant Auditor General running the entire performance audit practice. So one, we don't negotiate. Right? So I wouldn't call it negotiation, and you said you recognize it's not a negotiation. Now, I just want to roll us back a little bit, though, because we get focused on all of these audits. Here we got 24 of them, and we're focused on the recommendations. And yes, the recommendations are a critical part of these audits. But we don't want to lose sight of the most important part of the audit is also the conclusion on the audit. So we answer a basic question in all of these audits. For example, did the ministry effectively do A, B, and C? Did the ministry blah, blah? So we don't want to lose sight of what the conclusion was on the audit as well, because the recommendations, right, on an audit where the conclusion is not a positive one, if you will, if it was a not effective one, could be very substantial in order to fix that, to get to a point where there would be a positive conclusion. So we never want to lose sight of what the conclusions were in the audits. And I say that partially because when we get to the recommendations, I'm a believer, many of us do this job because we want to see improved programs and services, right? So it's not really about the number. So when I gave that example in Nova Scotia where 75% of things were complete within 2 years, that meant, as I think back, that meant maintenance enforcement, for example, particularly women and children, because in most cases it was women and children, got their payments quicker because we did an audit with recommendations that were implemented that saw people get their money that they should be getting, and so they could eat and have a place to live, right? So we make these recommendations wanting to see changes as a result of the recommendations. So that means, in direct response to your question, we want a recommendation that we hope will be accepted by the organization. Not just, the point isn't accept, the point is accept it and going to do something differently to improve the program and service to deal with that. So if they say that doesn't make sense, right? If it's something we feel strongly about, like let's say it's performance reporting on the effectiveness of a program, we say you should do performance reporting, and you say we're never going to do that, we might still make the recommendation because performance reporting is fundamental and is important. So we won't ditch a recommendation just because somebody is going to say no. But in most cases, we want to say, okay, if we're thinking you should look at this, this, and this, if you don't, talk to us about why. Do we really understand? Are we getting it all? And I think that is why we get to a recommendation that those recommendations are accepted, and I don't think it's one and done. I don't think it's just to shut us up, right? I think it's because we get to a point where it actually is going to make a difference and it's something they want to do. This is why, like in reporting on these audits, generally, that time frame is 18 weeks. This is not a 2-week process where we send out a report and say, yeah, tell us it's nice. Right, Laura in particular is going, yeah, I live it, she says. So there's a lot of back and forth on this, and it's not just this tiny time frame. So we do get to a point, I think, where the recommendations do make sense, and if we can't get to that point, we'll make the recommendation anyway, but that's why I say 99.9% of the recommendations are agreed to. Now, other reports. So let me, so come back to that negotiation thing if you want to come back and add anything. 2, I'll jump on the looking at other reports. So my view on that would be, 1, when we are doing our audit planning. So we have this idea on a topic. We want to look at a program. So we start gathering info. And before we decide to do an audit, we might spend hundreds, right, Laura? Hundreds of hours looking at the potential of doing an area. One of the things we will look at, if this thing has been consulted every possible which way, if there's been independent reviews of it, if there's been all of this stuff where clearly, you know, the answers are there, we will ask ourselves, what difference are we going to make, right? Is our audit going to add something? And the answer might be yes. But it may be no. And it may be that we decide we're not going to come and audit something right from the get-go because we don't think we're going to add anything and we think the answers are all there. But it may be that we go forward and proceed. When we do go forward and proceed, we will likely look at, as part of our planning, info that others have done. So if there's been work by the coroner, for example, to look at something. If there's been work by a health committee of the legislature to look at something, we are going to look at those things. We won't place what I would call, you know, sort of this reliance on it just because it was done by somebody else. And therefore, we'll just accept it and we'll report that as wrong. We won't do that, but it will inform background info as potential risk identifiers, things to ask about. So I think that was my thoughts on the 2, but Laura, you?
Sure, yeah, I can just add a little bit to that. I agree with everything you've said. So, but there's just a couple things when we are setting up our recommendations. We really do have quite a few discussions with management because it reinforces what their role is. Our role is to identify the original deficiency or issue in the audit, and their role is to fix it. So we don't necessarily dictate how to fix it, but we're saying in the recommendation, well, let's come up with a fix here. Oftentimes it just falls right out of what the issue is. So it's easy to make that recommendation. In the case of the oversight of contracted services for children and youth in care, I know that we were very aware of the number of recommendations that MCFD has from the youth advocate or the children and youth advocate. And that makes it important for us not to be duplicating that effort. It makes it important for us not to put too much work on public servants who are already dealing with recommendations for a number of independent bodies. And I know that one of the things that we do take very seriously is what have some of the other independent offices doing? What have been their recommendations? Are they in there doing work? We don't want to be in the organization at the same time. We don't have a huge staff complement in the Auditor General doing performance audit work, and there is a ton of entities in the government reporting entities. So we're really careful about making sure that we're putting our resources where they should be. I also like to say, again, like if there is an independent report out there that's in the public, we might take a look at that and look at who's done it, how was it done, what's the level of independence, and then we might just walk away and say, there's no need for us to duplicate that. Oftentimes those reports aren't made public. They're presented to the organization, and therefore we would ask for them, and they can be part of the evidence that we use. So we are very aware of those other pieces going on, and that helps inform how we make those recommendations. So yeah, we're really careful about that because we're a small group with a big job. So.
Okay, any other comments or questions?
Really good question.
No? Okay. Thanks for that. Then we'll move on to the consideration of the interim report on the examination of MMP's administration of the Advanced Research and Commercialization Grant Program, June 2024. Do you need a minute, or do we need a recess, or are you guys ready? Oh, sorry, yeah. Oh, yeah, we were, you were moving papers. I thought you were pulling other reports or something, so I thought, give a minute. There we go.
Okay, thank you, Chair. As you've seen in our interim report, our office has been busy conducting the examination that the House requested in its April 8th resolution. The examination team is with us this morning, and they are Laura Pierce, who you've just seen here for follow-up, so you can imagine what kind of summer she's having. Janice Dawson, who is behind me, and Maxwell Edwards, who is behind me as well. I'm very thankful to team members for the extensive work they've done so far and for their flexibility in pivoting to this priority work. The interim report covered the work we completed as of June 24th. As you can tell, it didn't include any findings since our examination is ongoing. Instead, the interim report outlined our approach to the examination, along with other matters that relate to the work. We also confirmed that we are independent with respect to any business or other relationships with MNP. Our internal systems of quality management and the Auditor General Act ensure we are nonpartisan, objective, and in full compliance with our professional and ethical responsibilities. Lastly, positively, I can tell you that we remain fully on track to deliver our final report no later than September 1st, as requested by the House. With that, I'll hand it over to Laura Pierce and team to fill in the other details.
Thank you, Michael. I'll now provide a very brief summary of the interim report. So as Michael mentioned, on April 8th, 2024, the Legislative Assembly directed by resolution that the Auditor General undertake an examination of grants administered by MMP under the Advanced Research and Commercialization Program, known as ARC, and the Commercial Vehicle Innovation Challenge, referred to as CIVIC. The resolution directed the Auditor General to make public an interim report within 90 days and a final report by September 1st, 2024. The interim report that we are discussing today fulfills the first part of that resolution. As Michael noted, our interim report does not contain any findings. Instead, it outlines what we are doing and what you can expect to see in the final report. Given the timelines prescribed in the resolution, we took a very deliberate approach to the examination by focusing on the allegations that led to the resolution. We are looking at whether the potential conflicts of interest raised through these allegations are real by asking 3 questions of MMP. The first, did MMP provide applicant advising services, e.g. grant writing, for ARC or civic applications? The second, did MMP influence the ARC or civic evaluation process to promote its clients? And the third, did MMP use ARC or civic information to solicit clients for MMP's other business services, such as applicant advising, assurance, or accounting? We are also asking a 4th question that looks at the Ministry of Energy, Mines, and Low Carbon Innovation's role in managing conflicts of interest by asking, did the Ministry of Energy, Mines, and Low Carbon Innovation identify and manage conflicts of interest in MMP's administration of the ARC program? Before I turn it back to Michael, I thought I'd highlight a few key points about the ARC program, which include civic, and the division of roles and responsibilities between the ministry and MMP, as outlined in the contract. The ARC program is one of many initiatives that falls under the Clean BC Go Electric program. It supports research and economic development in BC's zero-emission vehicle sector by providing grants to eligible companies. On March 1st, 2018, the Ministry of Energy, Mines, and Low Carbon Innovation entered into a contract with MMP to administer the ARC program, which has since been renewed 5 times. As per the contract, the ministry provides program oversight and direction, while MMP performs day-to-day administration. This type of administration work would include running the funding calls, responding to applicant questions, setting up the funding agreements at the direction of the ministry, and monitoring project progress. The ministry, on the other hand, provides overall direction to MMP, reviews and approves ARC material prepared by MMP, and decides which projects to fund. To date, the ARC program has received over 150 applications across 4 funding calls. 32 projects have been approved for funding, and another 20 have decisions pending. We will share further information on the results of our work in the final report that will be released by September 1st. And with that, I'll turn it back to Michael.
Thank you, Laura. As I mentioned, our work is proceeding, and as we mentioned, we will have that final report before September 1st, as set out in the resolution, and I'm extremely thankful and proud of Laura and the folks behind me and others for the work they've done to get this done so as to meet the requirements of the resolution. So that really completes our presentation on that interim report, and happy to take questions that we may be able to answer, and if there are questions that may have to wait to the final report.
Great. We'll just check in with the Controller General before we proceed. And anything to add?
Thank you, Chair. No, not at this time.
And I do appreciate the efforts to get this done in the timelines that the Legislature had laid out for you. And certainly we have I believe it's September 17th is the meeting for this committee to review that report as well. So any questions or comments from anyone on the committee? Seems fairly straightforward, but okay. Thank you so much for that. All we have left on the agenda is deliberations, and this would be if anyone has any direction on the first report that we received, which is the annual follow-up report and status of the performance audit recommendations. Recognize that time is tight to our writ period, which is September 21st, but obviously we do have an in-person meeting on September 17th as well. So the committee is still active and still actually working on receiving reports and meetings just like this right up until the writ period. So we do have some flexibility still to potentially talk to some ministries, not all probably, but we may be able to see some. So Any discussion? Jackie?
Well, based on the conversation that we had in regards to the report that was presented today, and the conversation around timelines, around the responsibility of this committee and accountability of the ministries to complete those recommendations, I'm going to move a motion that the Select Standing Committee on Public Accounts requests the Ministry of Children and Family Development appear before the committee to provide an update on the status of implementing recommendations in the Auditor General's report titled Oversight of Contracted Services for Children and Youth in Care at its meeting on September 17th, 2024.
Okay, so there's the motion there. I guess we can do these one item at a time if there's any other potential ones. Any discussion on, now correct me if I'm wrong, Jackie, this is the same group that we had originally had coming to the committee, and then the committee stood them down to try to wait for this latest report updating on their status, and now we've seen that there's been no progress despite the extra timeline to try to see what action they have taken. Do I have that correct?
I think, I mean, it's a 2019 report. We've talked about it a number of times at this table. We've certainly heard from the Auditor General in regards to, transparency and accountability. And I think it is incumbent on this committee to actually ask the ministry to come and report to this committee. That is the job of this committee. And when I think about some of the situations that have been very public, and that we are sitting on a report that has zero completion on recommendations, I think it's incumbent on this committee to ask the ministry to come forward and to talk about that and tell us what they're doing.
Okay. Rona Ray?
Thanks for bringing this forward. If we hear over and over again that zero is completed, and I look at the report that has been given and how much has been completed and how much is in progress. And every year there's been progress. There's been some slowdowns. Well, we had a pandemic, but that still kept the work moving. We also had, in that report, suggestion that there had been some slowdowns due to leadership changes back a little while ago. And now they are looking at various completions on the recommendations in 2025. And one of them, the last one, relates to being completed in 2026 after a particular program is totally rolled out. So I believe that that coloring this as a 0% is not accurate in the sense that there has been progress. But at the same time, I can see that there is a desire to have the ministry accountable. And so for that reason, I will support having them come to talk about what's been going on in that particular file within MCFD.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay. All those in favor? And opposed? Okay. Carried. Spencer was opposed, yeah. Carried?
No, I was in favor.
Oh, sorry, there was a time lag. Okay, I'm glad I double checked. Spencer was in favor, to be clear on that for the record. Sorry about that, Spencer. Okay, so there's, sorry, did you want to add something?
I said no worries, no worries.
Yeah, seems to be a half-second lag here that's causing issues, so we'll just double check on any other votes as well for you, just to make sure we get it accurate. Any other deliberations or potential? Any other new business? And then a motion to adjourn.